Hello, and welcome to Illinois Learn to Hunt Firearms for Illinois Deer Hunting Overview. Before we get started tonight, I just want to go over a few reminders. If this is your first time with us, welcome. If it's your first time with us, welcome. If you're coming back from other webinars, welcome back. And just so you know, your microphones and webcams are disabled. So sit back, relax, enjoy the webinar as we work our way through the presentation. If you have any questions, you can drop that in the Q&A window or in the chat window, and you can also talk to each other through the chat. And we encourage you to do so, especially with this webinar. There may be some questions that pop up here and there going over different firearms, so feel free to communicate through that window. And at the end, we'll have time for a Q&A, so if any questions pop up and you think of them throughout the presentation and we don't answer them, please ask us at the end. We'll sit around and answer any questions you may have. After the webinar, you'll receive an email in the coming days with a copy of this PowerPoint, maybe some informative handouts that we'll have for y'all, and a link to a YouTube channel of the recording of this webinar, as well as a feedback survey. So please fill those out and get them back to us, because we use that data to help influence our program on where we're going to go next with it, see what kind of information you guys still want to learn about, and how well of a job we did so far. So with that, course overview real quick. So we're going to go over how equipment sales help fund conservation efforts in Illinois and also nationally. Then also we're going to talk about some legal methods of take, and then we're going to do a review of some gun safety very quickly. But then we're going to go over the different parts, not parts, well, we will go over parts, but we'll go over the different methods of take that are used in the firearm season, which is going to be shotgun, muzzleloader, and handguns. And then we're going to talk about how to sight in a firearm, as well as some common gear used during the firearm season. Our presenters tonight with us, we have Dan. Dan, would you like to say hello?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Hello, Dan. We also have with us Adam. Adam, we want to say hi.
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for joining us tonight.
And then we also have Curtis. Curtis, you want to say hello?
Good evening, everybody. Happy Earth Day.
Yeah, happy Earth Day, everybody. I'm Jason Buckley. Welcome tonight. Hopefully this is some information that's going to help you out in the future here, and we're going to get going with it right away. I believe Dan's going to start us off by talking about how hunters are conservationists through purchasing firearms and ammunition.
Perfect. Thanks, Jason. And before we get started, I want to give a quick reminder to anybody who's interested in deer hunting, since this is a firearm or muzzleloader Class 4 deer hunting. The current firearm deer lottery is open in Illinois for this upcoming fall. We're in the middle of the first application period. So if you have not submitted your application to obtain an Illinois deer firearm permit for this upcoming fall, make sure to get that application in. I have just dropped a link into the chat that'll allow you to quickly go there, set up your account if you're a new user, and it'll kind of walk you through the process of how to submit that lottery application. But now we're going to dive right into it. And we hope this webinar tonight is a good fundamental overview of the different types of firearms that are out there, what you need to know as a new hunter, or even as an experienced hunter. Myself, I grew up in Missouri hunting, and in Missouri, we can use rifles for deer. So coming over to Illinois about 7 years ago was a pretty stark contrast to what I was used to hunting with. And so it takes some cognitive thought to be able to train yourself and understand the nuances of these firearms, so that you can make sure to get the most ethical and effective harvest that you can on that animal. So we're going to dive right into it, but we want this to be very conversation based. So if you have any questions at any point, please, again, drop them in the chat and the Q&A feature so that we can get those answered. We did have a few questions submitted ahead of time that we'll go through as we kind of reach the appropriate stages in the presentation. But first, we're going to start off with a very quick discussion on how purchasing firearms and ammunition actually supports conservation efforts. Especially since it's Earth Day, this is kind of really important to highlight the importance of hunters as conservationists and as stewards of the landscape. So in 1937, there was two congressmen, Pittman and Robertson, who decided that they wanted to impose an excise tax on all firearms and ammunition sales. This also includes archery. And what's really cool about how this funding is kind of developed is that it's not an additional sales tax that's kind of run up at the the point of sale. So this is already taxed at the manufacturer's level. So once that item leaves the manufacturer's store, they are paying the taxes on it. Now, of course, that's kind of built into the price that us as consumers will pay, but just know that you are paying a substantial portion of conservation efforts in this country. And if you're curious how big some of these apportionments are, you can see in 2021, Illinois received $13.8 million from this Pittman-Robertson funds. And the really cool thing about this pot of money is that it can't be used. It has very specific use cases. So it can't be, gobbled up and used in the general revenue fund for the state. It has to be for these very specific use cases. And you can see here a few of those items that are here: fish and wildlife population management, habitat management, research, land acquisition, construction of wildlife management areas. And so you can see, while hunters and shooters are the big kind of funders in this pot of money, they're also going to receive the majority of those benefits. So this is a really cool funding story for how conservation is funded in the United States. But now we're going to drop right into kind of the bulk of this presentation. So what are the legal firearms for deer hunting in Illinois? Now, as we get through this presentation, you'll realize that a lot of it depends on where you're hunting, when you're hunting, what tag you have. But in general, there are kind of three types of firearms that can be utilized for firearm deer hunting in Illinois. The first is going to be a shotgun, which cannot be larger than 10 gauge and not smaller than 20 gauge. And so there's a few gauges there you can play with. The 10 gauge, the 12 gauge, the 16, and the 20. And we'll go over the kind of pros and cons of a little bit later. Up next, you can also use handguns in Illinois. Now, these handguns have to be center fire revolvers or center fire single shot handguns of 30 caliber or larger with a minimum barrel length of 4 inches. And then a muzzle loader is just what it sounds like. It's a rifle that is essentially loaded from the muzzle of the firearm. So it's a firearm that is incapable of being loaded from the breech or from the rear of the firearm like your typical rifle. And we'll explain that concept a little bit later as well. So here's kind of a quick overview of the Illinois firearm deer seasons. You can see they typically run November to December is kind of when the bulk of Midwest firearm seasons are. In Illinois, we kind of have a unique season structure in that we have 2 different seasons where some states may have one kind of longer season. Here in Illinois, we do have the split season. So the first firearm season is November 19th through the 21st. The second firearm season is December 2nd through the 5th. And the muzzleloader only season is December 10th through the 12th. Now, since we are in Illinois, there are a couple of legal ramifications that we need to discuss prior to really diving into firearms. And one of the main credentials that you will be required to have is an Illinois FOID card, or a firearm owner's identification card. Essentially, regardless of who owns the firearm, any Illinois resident who has a firearm or ammunition in their possession must have a valid FOID card. These FOID cards are issued by the Illinois State Police, not by the Illinois DNR. If you happen to call Illinois DNR with questions about a FOID card, they will not be able to answer them. So you'll have to refer those questions to the Illinois State Police. Now, these FOID cards do expire after 10 years. And unfortunately, with COVID restrictions, as well as some of the public unrest, there was a lot of applications for FOID cards the past year. Excuse me, and there is a pretty substantial lag period. Now, they have offered some grace period, particularly if you already have a FOID card and maybe you need to get it renewed or you need to do an address change. But just be aware that there is about, I think last time I looked, it was about 100-day waiting period, which normally it's about 30 days. So if you're up for a renewal in the next year, or maybe you don't have a FOID card, but you want to transition to maybe firearm hunting this upcoming fall, this is something you should probably focus on rather quickly. It's fairly inexpensive and a fairly easy process. It's about $10 fee online. You can do it all online and just have it done in a day. And then you'll just have to wait until they're able to process it. A few other regulations that you need to be aware of. You must be 18 to purchase a long gun in Illinois. You have to be 21 years or older to buy a handgun or pistol. And obviously you have to have a FOID card, a state ID or driver's license. And at the counter, when you go to purchase a firearm, you will have to fill out a federal form 4473, which is essentially a firearm transfer form. And they will also conduct state and federal background checks. Now, in Illinois, there is a 72-hour waiting period from the time you purchase a firearm until you can pick it up. So just be aware of that. If it's your first firearm purchase and you're not new to all this, if you go to purchase a firearm, you will not be able to take it home that exact day. You will have to wait through that waiting period. And now we would be remiss if we didn't discuss firearm safety a little bit. So we're going to go over kind of the 4 primary rules of firearm safety. Obviously, number 1, you always want to keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction. Number 2, you always want to treat every firearm as if it were loaded. Number 3, always be sure of what's beyond and in front of your target. And number 4, always keep your finger off the trigger and out of the trigger guard until you are ready to shoot. And if you follow these 4 basic rules of firearm safety, you will never have an accident with a firearm. A few other things to kind of keep in mind. Never rely on your gun safety. You can see we've kind of highlighted in this top graphic with a little orange circle. This is basically a mechanical safety that's built into the firearm that disables the action of the firearm. However, these are mechanical devices and they can and they will eventually fail. They'll wear out over time. So never, never, never rely on your safety. It's always good to use that safety, but never rely on that safety. You always want to match the correct ammunition to the exact firearm that you're using. And we'll go over this a little bit later, but you can see here an example in the bottom picture. You're dealing with a very combustible shotgun shell. And if there's nowhere for that energy to escape, it's essentially going to make its own path to escape. And so you always want to match the correct shotgun shell to the correct shotgun. For instance, a 20 gauge shotgun shell can actually slide all the way down the barrel of a 12 gauge and get stuck far enough that you can still load a 12 gauge shell behind it. And that's essentially what you see in this bottom picture. So again, you always want to match the correct ammunition to the correct firearms. And always protect your ears and eyes when shooting. Be sure the barrel is clear of any and all obstructions. Now, obviously, we don't want to be looking down the barrel of a shotgun, but in your firearm owner's manual, there will be a quick illustration on how to remove the barrel from the stock so you can quickly check that barrel for obstructions. And firearms should always be unloaded when not in use. And when you're transporting a firearm in Illinois, especially in a car, you want a safe that can close. That firearm should be in the trunk of your vehicle and it should be completely unloaded. So a couple of pros and cons of kind of each of these different options. Let's say, you're a brand new person, you want to get into firearm deer hunting, but maybe you're not sure what's right for you, or maybe, you're a seasoned hunter, but maybe you're looking to expand and kind of pick up a muzzleloader. So we'll go over the pros and cons fairly quickly here. But shotguns are readily available and extremely common on the market. Now, I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Missouri where we could use rifles for deer hunting. And here in Illinois, obviously, we cannot use centerfire rifles for deer hunting. There is a lot of states that share that same restriction. Some states like Wisconsin, they have portions of the state that you may be able to use a rifle, portions where you have to use a shotgun. And so it just kind of differs from kind of state to state and area to area. But again, in Illinois, we're only focused on shotgun, handgun, and muzzleloader. But the nice thing about shotguns is they're readily available, they're common, fairly cheap ammunition, and the ammunition is also fairly easily to find, especially slugs. They have excellent stopping power, and it's a great firearm, particularly if you live in Illinois and maybe deer isn't the only species that you want to hunt. Well, with a shotgun, you can quickly go from hunting deer to hunting goose, to hunting little quail, to hunting squirrels. And so it's a very versatile firearm that you can use for a multitude of different species. Now, the cons, obviously, it's not as lightweight as a handgun. And it also has a fairly shorter effective range than a muzzleloader. Remember, a muzzleloader is basic. It's a type of rifle. So it has rifling in the barrel that will conduce spin on that projectile, allowing it to have greater accuracy over longer periods of time. Now, when we dive into shotguns a little bit later, we'll go over a way you can basically cause that same effect in a shotgun and get that rifling of your projectile. However, it's still not going to be as accurate as a rifle or as a muzzle loader. Now,
Hey, Dan,
handguns, yes.
we got a quick question from Todd. How about kids that have completed their hunter's ed? Do they need a FOID card to hunt independently?
That's a great question, Todd, and I will get to that in just a few seconds. But great question and noted. I will get to that shortly. So handguns, again, they're lightweight and easy to carry afield. They're compact, they're accurate, and the modern loads that have been developed for a lot of these handguns and pistols create excellent wound channels that have really good stopping power, really good accuracy, and get a really solid, ethical, clean harvest from your shot. Now, there are some real drawbacks with handguns in particular. They have a reduced effective range. You're not, looking at shooting 100 yards with a handgun. This is an up close, very similar to archery range, so 30 to 40 yards, depending on your exact setup. Now, you can certainly build a handgun designed for hunting that can reach out a little bit further, but traditionally, you're thinking of a much more reduced range than out of a shotgun or a muzzleloader. Now, a muzzleloader is accurate. You're getting an increase in range over both the handgun and shotgun. They are reliable. They can be extremely inexpensive. You can find these anywhere from $200 up to whatever you really want to spend. But point is, you can find them readily available on the market, and they're not terribly expensive to get a really good functioning firearm. Now, there are some substantial cons and drawbacks to utilizing a muzzleloader. We'll get to explain a lot of these later on if maybe you're not familiar with what we're describing here. But a muzzleloader is essentially a single shot firearm that is you're basically taking a dissected cartridge and you're putting the powder in yourself. You're putting the primer in yourself. You're putting the bullet on top in itself. And so it takes long. So you will have about 60 seconds between your first shot and your potential follow-up shot if you happen to need that. So that is a pretty significant drawback to the muzzleloaders, that reloading time. Also, muzzleloaders have a tendency to smoke out after shot. So when you're firing a muzzleloader, very often you won't actually be able to see your target after you pull that trigger. Once that primer ignites the powder, you will see this cloud of white smoke at the end of your muzzle, and you won't really be able to see anything beyond that. So that can be a drawback in some cases. Cleaning is required after pretty much every shot with a muzzleloader. They're very dirty because, again, that powder is not contained inside of a cartridge. It's just kind of loose in there. And so it does call for some pretty substantial cleaning. And again, with a muzzleloader, there are a lot of additional accessories and equipment is required. I see a question from Christian, and that's an excellent question. And I actually reached out to a law enforcement officer this afternoon to address that question. So when we get to the handgun section, if you'll remind me of that, I'll pull up his email and read basically word for word what he said. But he actually brought up the 300 blackout in an AR platform and address that. So when we get to the handgun section, remind me if I don't bring it up. All right, so now we're going to do kind of a deep dive into shotguns. So what is a shotgun? A shotgun is a firearm that has a long barrel, which is usually smooth barrel. And historically, shotguns were first designed to shoot at moving targets, particularly fowl and different bird species out of the air. And so typically a shotgun shell is going to be loaded with very small BBs, or what we normally call pellets. And so depending obviously on the shot size and the shotgun shell you select, oftentimes there may be 400 to upwards of 1,000 of these individual pellets inside a shotgun shell. Now, when we're thinking about deer hunting, we are not using shotgun shells with shot loaded into it. We're essentially using slugs. And so you're essentially creating a single projectile out of these shotguns. And again, shotguns come in a variety of different gauges, different materials, barrel lengths, actions, and of course, chamber length. And we'll go over those in a few more slides in greater detail. So a few shotgun related regulations. You cannot legally use any shotgun that is larger than 10 gauge to hunt in Illinois. So there are, gauges out there that an 8, I think I've heard of 4, I think exist. So these are bigger than 10 gauge, but you cannot legally use them to hunt in Illinois. The barrel length should not be less than 18 inches. And so very often, if you're at a firearm store, you may see some of these kind of tactical home defense style shotguns. Those are not suitable for hunting. You need to have that minimum of an 18 barrel length, and the overall length of the shotgun should not be less than 26 inches. Now, the vast majority of shotguns on the market that are marketed at hunters will meet those 2 criteria. Just kind of make sure you're staying away from kind of those home defense models that oftentimes have, maybe a pistol grip or a shorter stock and then a shorter barrel. Another big regulation to keep in mind, especially with shotguns, is that you cannot legally use a shotgun that is capable of holding more than 3 shells. And if you think back to that graphic we showed a few minutes ago, there are several different types of shotguns. We'll get to this here in a second, but many of them have an expanded magazine that allows the magazine to hold several shells in addition to the chamber. So the shotgun you go buy off the shelf will probably allow you to hold one shotgun shell in the chamber and then 4 or 5 in the magazine. That would technically be an illegal firearm to use. And so what we need to do to offset that is purchase a plug. And very commonly when you buy a brand new firearm, it will come with a plug in the case or in the box of the firearm, because most states have this regulation. But it's essentially a little plastic spacer that fits in the magazine tube of your shotgun and basically just takes up space, so that you do not have the option to load more shotgun shells in that magazine tube. Now you may say, okay, well, what if I go out and I, have 1 in the chamber, 2 in the magazine? Even though it can hold more, I'm not personally holding more. That technically does not matter. It doesn't matter how many you have in the firearm. It matters how many that firearm can hold. Because obviously, you could quickly take them out when a CPO or a conservation officer approaches you. And so you need to make sure you have that plug installed into your shotgun. And again, you will need to have a valid FOID card in your possession.
Hey, Dan, before we leave this slide, if you could go back real quick, Jason, I got a quick pop quiz. Does anybody know what in tarnation is on the cover of the regulations? Drop it in the chat. Okay, go on.
And I'm going to address that. Ooh, Julian got it. Very, very good. I'm going to address the other question we had a second ago about FOID card for youth, essentially. Before we get too much further, I just thought this was kind of a nice time to bring it up. But so again, regardless of who owns the firearm, residents are required to have a FOID card, except there's a few exceptions, except a licensed non-resident. So if you're a non-resident, maybe you're from Missouri and you're just hunting in Illinois, you do not have to have a FOID card. You also do not have to have a FOID card if you are under the age of 21 and under the immediate control of a parent or guardian or responsible adult who has in his or her possession a valid FOID card. So in your scenario that you brought up, I think you said, let me scroll up, for them to hunt independently, then yes, they would need to have a FOID card to be able to hunt independently with a firearm. So now we'll go over some of the basic shotgun types that you're likely to see. And there's a plethora of different shotgun models. But we are essentially just going to discuss a lot of the more common ones, the ones that you're likely to encounter at a firearm store or out in the field. And so some of the common shotgun actions that you're going to see are going to be break actions. And so these are shotguns that technically break open and you load the shell in the back of the barrel. So there's 2 different types here. You can see the over-under and the side-by-side. Now, these are not very suitable for deer hunting, particularly with slugs. There are people that do it, but there are much better options out there for deer hunting. The 2 most commonly utilized for deer hunting are going to be your pump action shotgun, as well as your auto loader or semi-automatic. Now, the advantage of a semi-automatic is that you don't have to have this manual action of recharging that pump. So on the pump action, you can see this wooden stock at the forefront. After you pull the trigger, you're going to have to pull that all the way back and push it forward for it to cycle in a new shell and reload itself. where the semi-automatic, it essentially uses the gases from that cartridge firing to basically recycle the round. And so those gases will be utilized to push the bolt back. It will automatically eject the old shell and automatically throw in a new one and slam the chamber closed before you can even blink an eye. And so obviously if reloading time is a something you're interested in trying to increase, you would want to go with the semi-automatic. Now I will say on average, typically semi-automatics are going to be more expensive than pump actions. And when we finish this section, I'll show you a few of the real common models and kind of how much they cost. So we can explain that a little bit further. But I personally use a pump action. Pump actions are reliable. They're fairly inexpensive for fire in terms of firearms. They're reliable, they work, and you can really the thing I like about the pumps is the two common ones, the Remington 870 and the Mossberg 500 are kind of the two. Yep, see Joe actually just typed in the chat. The 500 and the 870. Those are kind of two of the most common used pump shotguns. They both are readily available, especially in terms of parts. Now, the Remington brand did declare bankruptcy, I think about a year ago, but I read an article the past few months, they're starting to revamp, they're starting to rebuild, and they're coming back strong. And they did put out a press release a few weeks ago that the Remington 870 is going to be the first one they bring back to market. So they'll be cranking those out hopefully here fairly soon because again, it is popular, it is loved, and it's a very reliable firearm. But the Mossberg 500 is another great option. But what makes these two very good shotguns, particularly for deer hunting, is the availability of swappable parts. So you can kind of view it like, maybe a Honda Civic or one of these cars that a lot of people use, some of these aftermarket kits and aftermarket parts on. The 870 and the Mossberg 500 have swappable barrels, have swappable stocks. So you can basically change the entire firearm with just a few options. Now, a couple other action types that you may find but are not very common are going to be the lever action and the bolt action. And so the lever action it's kind of similar to the old cowboy rifles that you see people use, where they have to kind of push it in, push it down, and it kind of swings up. The bolt action is a type of action that's more common in rifles than shotguns, but there are some older models of shotguns that still do use kind of a bolt action. So those are another great option if you can find those. But I personally, again, I prefer the pump or the semi-automatic, and the pumps have that decreased price, which is very appealing. Now, a quick conversation about shotgun gauges. Let's say you're looking to buy your first firearm. What gauge is good? And it really comes down to you as a shooter, and also the species that you plan on hunting and the type of shooting that you plan on doing. So we'll quickly go over what gauge is, because a lot of people don't really know what the term gauge is, and I certainly didn't until a few years ago. But gauge is essentially this real old, I believe it's European style of measurement, but it essentially looks at the amount of lead of the exact same diameter and how much it would take to equal 1 pound. And so, for example, you can see the 12 gauge shotgun is about 0.73 inches in diameter. And so 12 solid lead balls that are also of that same diameter, 0.73, equal 1 pound. And so that's where they get the 12 gauge. So if you think about it, the lower the number, the bigger the gauge is. So 10 gauge is a lot bigger than a 28 gauge. So again, you have several different gauges to choose from. These are, again, just the common gauges. There's a 10 gauge, which is great for deer, turkey, goose. Now, this is going to have substantial recoil because it is a fairly substantial shotgun. Shells and ammunition will be more expensive, and it will be a little bit tougher to find. The two most common gauges that are used by hunters and target shooters are going to be the 12 gauge and the 20 gauge. And again, there are gauges larger than 12. However, they cannot be used to hunt in Illinois. So 10 gauge, again, like I said, primarily used for large geese and turkey. Now 12 and 20, these are 12. What I like to say is 12, 16, and 20 are really the sweet spots if you want a firearm that can do a lot of things. Now 20, it can start to have its drawbacks on some of the bigger species, particularly if you're interested in goose hunting. A 20 gauge is a little bit light. Now you can certainly be very productive goose hunter with a 20 gauge, assuming they're in close and tight, but again, it will reduce that effective range. So I'm a big believer in the 12, 16, and 20. And again, it just kind of depends on what you plan on hunting. The 12 gauge is great for just about everything you can do in the state of Illinois, as is the 16. The only issue with the 16 is that it's not as common of a gauge. Back when I first started hunting, my first shotgun was actually a 16 gauge. And over the years, it's just been harder and harder to find any reliable source of ammunition for 16 gauge, where you can go into any Walmart, any Bass Pro Cabela's, and you can readily find 12 and 20 gauge. But 16 is a little bit tougher. But again, for deer hunting, 12, 20, 16, you're going to do great. Now here's where we kind of get a little bit more technical. And so if we think back to my first conversation about shotguns and kind of historically what they were, they're kind of just this straight, barreled firearm that has a smooth bore. Because again, typically shotguns are used for shooting multiple projectiles like shot at moving fowl. And if you think about trying to put a projectile into a smooth tube, you can see and kind of think over time that's going to start to tumble. It's not going to have that perfect spin pattern. If you think about whoever your favorite quarterback is, dropping in the pocket and throwing a long Hail Mary, how tight of a spiral that football has as it's going downfield. Bullets need that same spinning motion to be effective and accurate. And so you have a couple different options. Now, when you go to buy a shotgun, you can either buy a smooth barreled shotgun, or you can buy one with a rifled barrel. And the rifled barrel is going to give you a little bit more accuracy over time. It's really effective for shooting slugs. However, you're not going to want to shoot shot out of it. You're going to only want to use slugs. Now, you can't even throw a scope onto a rifled slug, and you have a really solid setup. So me personally, I use a Remington 870 with a rifled barrel, and I threw a shotgun scope on it, and I can pretty accurately hit about I'd say a 5-inch group at 150 yards, which I'm never going to shoot 150 yards where I hunt anyway. So that's just kind of the max limit, but anything within, 75 to 100 yards it's a really solid setup for that. Now a smooth barrel, again, you can still shoot slugs with it. You just have to know what type of slugs to use. And we'll go over that in the next slide. Sorry. But the advantage of a smooth barrel is obvious. You don't have to have, different barrels to swap. But what manufacturers started to realize, and this kind of goes back into why I think the pump shotguns are so effective for deer hunting, is you can buy these swappable barrels for, $100 to $150 in some places. And so for a Mossberg 500, you can get an additional rifled barrel, and then boom, now you have a shotgun that you can put a scope in your rifled barrel on and go hunt deer. You can put your smooth, and then you can go ahead and go shoot, pheasants or quail. And so it's a real great option if you're just looking to purchase one firearm and kind of get the most hunting opportunity outside of that specific firearm. That's a great question, Joe. And we do have quite a bit of slides on that towards the end. If you'll go ahead and advance slides, Jason. But primarily, if you're thinking about a good scope, the big thing to keep in mind, and we'll reiterate this a little bit later, is to focus on a scope that is made for shotguns. And so if you were to put a scope on that's made for a 22 rifle or some of these smaller rifle cartridges, the impact and the kick and the recoil from a shotgun, particularly a 12 gauge, is going to instantly knock that scope out of alignment. And so you may have it dead centered, sighted on, and then take a shot. And now it may be, a foot to the left or a foot down, or it may just completely destroy the optics to where it looks like your crosshairs are actually falling down and not, a true cross. So you just want to make sure to get one that's rated for heavy recoil. So like I mentioned, there are two kind of main types of slugs. You have the rifled slug, and you also have what is technically pronounced the Sabot slug, but a lot of people just call it the Sabot slug. But depending on the firearm, there is kind of an exact match. You don't want to mismatch your slug types with your firearm. You want to make sure you're using the correct one. And so the easiest way to think about it is you never want your slug and your barrel to be rifled. You only want one of them. So if you think about a rifled slug, you can see here at this little illustration at the bottom, that's basically the projectile pulled out of a shotgun shell. You can see it's got these angled grooves basically cut into that big hunk of lead. And what that does is as it's going down that smooth barrel of the shotgun, those kind of grooves are catching and creating friction, which slowly is going to start imparting spin on that projectile as it leaves the barrel. Now, if you were to put that exact slug through a rifled barrel, you can imagine you're never going to have an instance where the two rifle patterns match up perfect. And so there's always going to be, you know, a little bit of drag, and it's going to over time begin to damage the rifling of your barrel, and it's going to really substantially reduce your accuracy. So just keep in mind, if you're using a smooth barrel, you want to have a rifled slug. So again, only one of them should be rifled, not both. Now the Sabot Slugs or Sabot Slugs, they were designed to be fired out of a rifled slug, or out of a rifled slug, out of a rifled barrel. And so you can see the shape of that projectile is a lot more similar to your standard rifle bullet. And so this is made to be, again, designed to be shot with a rifled slug, and as that or a rifled barrel. And as that projectile moves forward, the rifling in the barrel is going to cause the same spin, and it's going to impart that spin. And as it leaves the barrel, that will allow it to maintain accuracy over time. Now, if you're, just starting your, well, what are the options? Well, I'll go ahead and say a few things. The Sabot slug or the Sabot slug out of a rifled barrel is going to be a lot more accurate than a rifled slug out of a smooth barrel. However, if you're shooting, 100 yards, maybe 125 and closer, especially in a hunting scenario, you're not likely to notice that accuracy deficiency between the two. But Sabot slugs really excel, past 100 yards, you really start to gain on your accuracy there. And they are a little bit more expensive in terms of just the cost of buying a box of shells. The Sabot slugs are going to be a little bit more expensive than your typical rifled slugs. And a lot of that is due to the precision that goes into them, but also the alloys and the metals. And so you can see this typical rifled slug, a lot of them are just going to be solid lead slugs, where these Sabot slugs or Sabot slugs, they may be copper, they may be tungsten, they may have some of these other kind of high-end metallic alloys that supposedly perform a little bit better. So just be cognizant, there is a cost difference between the two types of slugs. Now, if you're going to mount a scope onto a shotgun, there's a couple different options you have. And it really depends on the firearm that you choose and the setup you choose. Now, I hunted deer a long time without the use of a scope. You can see here in this top Remington 870, it's got essentially iron sights on the end or on that barrel. And if you're shooting, 50 yards at max, that's a great setup, and you can be extremely accurate with it. So don't think you have to buy a scope. You can certainly go without it, but it is going to make you a more effective shooter and allow you to increase your range. And there's a couple different ways to attach a scope. We'll just go over kind of the basics of this, but what I really like is a lot of these new these new swappable barrels that are rifled very often have the scope mount kind of built into them. And that's, I'll tell you, that is a life-saving and money-saving feature. I guess not life-saving, but time and money-saving feature, because what it allows you to do is pull that barrel off, and the scope is going to remain attached to the barrel. And what that allows you to do is then put on your smooth bore barrel and maybe go hunt pheasants. You can put your rifled barrel back on with your scope, and now it's somewhat zeroed in. Now, I wouldn't go hunt with it immediately. I would still want to target shoot and make sure it still retained that accuracy, but at least you're going to be very close to accurate. So you won't have to do that whole process of, oh my gosh, I don't even know where my bullet's hitting at this point, and kind of having to start the process over. Now, on the bottom, that's kind of that newer style that I was talking about. Now, if you don't want to go that option, you can take it to a gunsmith. There are several different mounts they can install on the receiver of your shotgun where this top arrow is pointing. They can drill holes in there and do several different mounting options for you. But and Curtis gave a good reply asking about solid scope. So I'll just let you read that instead of kind of rehashing his thoughts. Now we'll go over a couple common shotguns for deer hunting. Now, I do want to specify this is not an official endorsement or a product review of specific firearms. This kind of list is just for educational purposes. Any of the shotguns that are out there on the market, just read the reviews, and you won't go wrong. And I do highly recommend talking to the people behind the counter at gun stores. They are very knowledgeable. They know what they're talking about, and very common. They can help put you in the right place. But now we're just going to, again, list a few of these common shotguns that make good deer hunting shotguns. So obviously the first one, we'd be kind of remiss if our list didn't start with the Remington 870, shortly followed by the Mossberg 500. But the Remington 870, again, it's a pump action shotgun that you can find at a reasonable price. Again, quote unquote, usually. We're kind of in different times here, and Remington 870 is a little bit more difficult to find than it used to be, but that should start kind of rectifying itself soon. Now, the 870 is often praised for its reliability. It's one of those shotguns that the tolerances are loose enough that dirt and grime is not going to slow it down. It's one of these shotguns that's just reliable, and it just works when you need it to work. Again, like I mentioned earlier, additional barrels and components are readily available to purchase. You can get the Remington 870 in 12, 16, and 20 gauge for deer, and obviously you can also find them in 410 and 28 gauge is available, but again, those are not legal for deer. But the Remington 870 is an excellent multi-purpose shotgun, and typically when they're on the store shelves, you can find them for under $400. But again, Remington is said to increase production soon. But here in this bottom picture, you can see what some of the kits that they sell now, or that they used to sell when they were producing them and plan to here shortly. It's basically you buy one kit, and it comes with a smooth barrel, a rifle barrel, the 870, and a scope, kind of all in one. And so those are options as well. If you're buying your first hunting firearm, those are a great way to kind of get everything you need right then and there. Another popular shotgun is the Mossberg 500 Slugster. Now, I will kind of give a quick explanation of why I chose the Slugster version, but essentially the Slugster version is a Mossberg 500 with a rifled barrel, and that's kind of the big distinction there. Now, the Mossberg 500 is known to be extremely reliable. It's used by home defense specialists. It's used by police officers regularly. And it's one of these shotguns that doesn't have a lot of frills, but it's reliable, it works, and can be found readily for a very reasonable price. So you're looking at about $350 for a standard Mossberg 500 with kind of this wood stock finish. You can certainly get it in all black synthetic stock, or you can get the Mossberg 500 Slugster, which is a rifled barrel, and it does come with scope. And I found one for $450. I think that was Cabela's, where I got that price. And so Mossberg 500, again, readily available, and they make excellent deer hunting shotguns.
And quick thing I just want to point out with between the Mossberg and the 870 is the safety. The Mossberg has the safety on top of the chamber there, or on top, so it's easier for people who shoot left or right-handed versus the one that's on the trigger guard like the 870. So just something to think about there.
Great point. And now if you want to go the option of a semi-automatic, kind of the more, let's say, reasonably affordable semi-automatic that you'll find used by a lot of deer hunters is going to be the Weatherby SA08. So this is a semi-automatic shotgun, and it's basically designed to be a deer hunting semi-automatic shotgun. They have kind of perfected their own choke tubes to be able to shoot slugs, and so that's kind of one of their main selling points here. I would caution you, this is an extremely lightweight firearm, so if you're a smaller framed person, this might be a little bit more intriguing. But I will say there isn't kind of a when you're talking about firearms, when you remove weight and make the firearm lighter overall, there's always a trade-off, right? And so a lot of times if you get a heavy firearm, it will not have as much recoil because it takes, again, more energy to push that heavier firearm into your shoulder. on a very lightweight firearm like the Weatherby SA08, you may find that you feel that recoil a little bit more, just because, again, the overall construction of the firearm is a little bit lighter weight than some of the heavier models. But the Weatherby SA08 have been praised for their kind of smooth and very fast action cycle. So again, this is one of those, you pull the trigger, it will automatically fire the shell. It will eject the shell, load a new one in automatically without the operator having to impart any other action onto that firearm. And you can find these for about $500 or so. Now, if you want to take the next step up, this is the Ithaca Deerslayer 3. Kind of an interesting name, but this is kind of what a lot of high-end people who are interested in getting a very high-end shotgun for deer hunting, this is an option that a lot of people choose. It's got a 24-inch barrel, which is a very long barrel for a shotgun, and it's made with very high precision, which is going to lead to increased accuracy. If you think about the Remington 870 and the Mossberg 500, I said when they were kind of designed and engineered, they had very loose tolerances. This is the exact opposite. This has very tight tolerances, which is going to increase your accuracy, but it is going to require you to thoroughly clean it and to keep it in good working condition. Now, these are available in 12 and 20 gauge, but you can see they advertise this as capable of shooting 4-inch groups at 200 yards, which for a modern shotgun, that's pretty incredible. Now, it is about $1,500. But again, this is another option that's out there. So you can see the range. You can spend anywhere from $200 to $300 all the way up to as much as you want to spend. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Curtis, and he's going to tell us all about muzzle loaders.
All right, muzzle loaders. There's a picture of me shooting my favorite. No, I'm just kidding. But yes, we're going to talk about muzzle loaders. This is my favorite weapon type out of the three that we're covering here. We kind of talked about the pros and cons, but just to reiterate, with the muzzle loader, you're getting a specialty gun that is going to give you a little bit more range, a little bit better accuracy than the other two options. But your biggest setback is going to be generally just that one shot. So now, if you're really quick, and especially with some of the new devices they have to make reloading quicker, you may be able to get off more than one shot, but most of the time it's just going to be that one shot. So other than that, you can get muzzle loaders that shoot just as good as some of the best breech loading rifles out there. So really neat. And the process of cleaning them is labor intensive, but to me, it's the kind of labor that's therapeutic, makes you feel old school and, lets you know you're going to get back out on the range and shoot some more shots. So with that, we'll get right into it here. So first off, when you think about muzzle loaders, you probably think about the Kentucky gun, or you think about Jim Bridger or Mountain Man type things, and you're probably thinking something like what you see here in the picture. And this is really the first firearm in existence, would have been the muzzle loader. And beginning all the way back in the 1600s, you started having these flintlocks, and you even had some that had a hammer that would have almost a cannon wick on it, and you'd pull the trigger, there'd be a delay. So the flintlocks were actually a bit of an improvement there, but the basic mechanism was a little piece of flint on a hammer that could swing and hit your frizzen and light some powder that you would pour in that pan. And there would be a small hole going all the way from that pan into the interior of the barrel, which would light the powder that was behind your lead ball and shoot it out into the barrel. So now, really, there wasn't a whole lot of advancements in muzzle loaders until about 1970, because as soon as people started making breech loaders and you could have a rifle or a firearm that could shoot multiple shots, there wasn't a whole lot of reason to, sort of increase the range or the effectiveness of muzzle loaders until about the 1970s, when they really made a resurgence in, especially in hunting circles. And some of this stems around management approaches where a lot of different states started adopting muzzleloader seasons that could increase, in some cases, people's effective hunting time, and even allow them to go out and maybe shoot another buck if they didn't get one in the firearm season. So at that point, people started looking back into muzzleloaders, and they had a reason to make them more accurate and make some improvements. So we'll talk about some of these as we go here. But the basic things that you need to shoot one of these are black powder, your lead ball, and then some sort of patch, because these lead round balls shot through the barrel to ensure that there's a good fit, and that powder, when it burns, all the gases push that ball out the barrel. You wrap those up in a patch. Modern day bullets are going to use a sabot or a little plastic attached to it. We'll show here in a second. But and a lot of times you needed two different kinds of powder with the flintlocks, because you would pour a finer powder in the pan that would burn a little bit quicker, and then a not quite a more coarse powder behind the bullet to burn a little bit slower and make sure that you get as much energy behind that bullet as possible. So a lot went into that. Then this picture in the right, one of the next big advancements once we hit 1970, where people started using these number 11 percussion caps. And you can still find some guns that use these today. They're still available. Nothing wrong with them. It's an improvement over having to pour powder in your pan and light a flint. So certainly much better than that, but we've even come a long way. We'll talk about here in these next couple slides. Let me make sure I'm not missing any questions here. Nope, doing pretty good. Okay. Then this next slide, so we get it up here. Modern day muzzleloaders look a lot different. So a lot different than these last couple pictures we've seen. Most people, if they saw that picture right there, they're probably not thinking muzzleloader. They're just thinking a rifle. So nowadays you can find thumb hole stocks and attach your sling on there and get your nice scopes, and the sky's the limit. So most of your modern day muzzleloaders are going to use 209 shot shell primers. That's the most common, and smokeless powder or Pyrodex powder. And then instead of shooting a lead ball that's wrapped up in a patch, they're going to shoot these sabots or power belt slugs. A lot easier to clean than previous models. A lot of the advancements in muzzleloaders have come in the cleaning, so it's access to that breech plug and being able to do that. Because like Dan mentioned before, muzzleloaders you need to clean every time you shoot them, meaning maybe not. If you're hunting, you can take multiple shots. If you do get a second shot, you don't have to clean it before your second shot, but you are going to notice a reduction in accuracy when you don't clean it. So when I target shoot my muzzleloader, when I am sighting it in and want it to be accurate, I clean it every shot. But then when I'm target shooting, I do go ahead and shoot it about 3 times without cleaning it, just to see what happens, because I do want to know how my gun will react if I have to do that in a hunting situation. And definitely I do notice a reduction in accuracy the longer you go without cleaning it. So if you want good accuracy, clean it after every shot, and certainly every time that you go out and shoot, once you get back, it's time to do a full take apart and clean. But now you can get break open and drop action designs that give you easy access to clean it, sometimes without even taking the barrel off the stock, which is pretty cool. There's some breech plugs that you can take out without special tools, which is pretty neat. Now, effective range at max 150 to 200 yards. Now, this, you can extend beyond this. There are muzzle loaders. Actually, I found one that says it shoots 1 MOA, so basically 1-inch groups at 500 yards. But this is a $9,000 custom-made muzzle loader. Most of your common off-the-shelf muzzle loaders that you find out there, and most of us who do not spend a ton of time practicing with them, 150 to 200 yards is about what you can expect for max, which is plenty. That's obviously quite a bit more distance than a pistol is going to give you, and even a little bit more distance than some of the better slug guns too. So, of course, it's not as a one shotgun. You can hunt everything in the state. This muzzle loader is going to have obviously much more narrow implications. Now, when it comes to the powder, they've made some advancements in that. They've even got little pellets where the powder's stuck together, so it's pre-measured out. You don't have to measure that out. Yeah, pretty cool. And then one thing I threw in here, one of the newest things is electronic ignition muzzle loaders. So CVA makes one called the Electra. I think there might be one or two others now, but they've done away with the primer. There's no primer. There's a battery that generates a spark it's crazy. It's mind-boggling to me. In some ways it's cool, and in some ways you gotta wonder where the line is drawn. But just so you know, there's cool stuff, new innovations coming out all the time. So stay tuned. I think I'll stick with the 209 primers myself. All right, so let's here. Okay. All right, loading an inline muzzleloader. So this looks like a lot. There's a lot going on here in this slide, but let me try to break it down for you. It's really not too bad. Number one, you see that barrel and a patch going down it. That's just telling you clean your barrel, wipe it out, make sure no big obstruction. That's going to give you good, much better accuracy. Number two and number three is telling you to snap your 209 primer in there. And that actually burns out any residue that might be in your the nipple in the breech plug, which that's the hole that goes through from the 209 primer to your powder. So you need that clear of obstructions. So snapping a couple caps off is a good way to do that. Number 5 is showing you putting the powder in. And these are the pellets. So the Pyrodex pellets, or a number of different companies make these now. You can even get them in pretty colors, which I have no idea what that does, but they do make them in different colors for whatever that's worth. And you'll push that powder all the way down to the bottom. Number 6 is showing a bullet inside a sabot, and you will put that in there. And number 7 is showing you, this is called a bullet starter or a ramrod. Generally the ones with the ball on it there, you'd have to buy special as a starter. Sometimes they're hard to get started. These do fit in there very, very snug. They have to if you want them to be accurate. And then number 8, sliding that all the way down to the bottom. Now this is where a little tip that I do, I take my unloaded muzzleloader, put my ramrod or all the ramrods that I'm going to use with that muzzleloader, and put it all the way down to the bottom and make a mark on it. And now I know whenever I put that ramrod in this gun, if I go down to that mark, that gun is unloaded. and that's good. And once I find a particular bullet and a load that I like with that gun, I'll make another mark to show where it should be when that bullet and the powder is fully seated. Because you do want to make sure that the powder and the bullet are all the way down as far as you can go. If you don't do that, it's not only not accurate, it can be unsafe. So make sure you push it all the way down, push it hard, make that mark, and then make sure every time that you're pushing it all the way down before you fire it. And then 9, 10, and 11 are just telling you how to basically open up your breech plug, put in your 209 primer, and then you're ready to hunt. Now at that point, it functions just like a normal rifle. You have a safety you would turn off right before you're ready to shoot. There'll be a cloud of smoke, and then 17 minutes later, when the smoke clears and you reload it, you can shoot again. It doesn't really take 17 minutes, but it does take a while. All right, let's talk about bullets. Look at all these different options. So they have made a lot of different advancements in muzzleloader bullets in the last couple decades too. Almost all of them are going to be 45 or 50 caliber. Sure, you'll see some different calibers. You'll still see some 54s, especially in some of the older guns, and even some smaller calibers. But these are the main two, and they're both great. Nothing wrong with 45 caliber. It's probably the better caliber for deer specifically. 50 caliber might be the more all-around caliber if you ever wanted to hunt bigger game out west or something. But 45 is great for deer. The one thing that's going to be common, they all have to have some plastic polymer type thing to wrap them. So these sabots here on the right, they both fit into that little sabot. The bullet goes in the sabot and you push them into the gun. These power built bullets over on the left, they've got kind of a little sabot that just, it sticks to them. So you don't have to put it in it. They just stay on there. It's just another type of bullet. I recommend every muzzleloader is different. If you got the time, take some different powder charges, some different bullets, go out and target shoot them and see what your gun likes the best. Because I have definitely had muzzleloaders that shot one bullet in one load, not very good. You know, I wasn't happy with it at all. And then I tried a different type of bullet, and you know, the accuracy got to a place where I was satisfied with it. So that definitely can change it, as can the amount of powder that you use. So really good tip, if you can, try a couple different loads, a couple different powders before you settle on one. And then you see these poly tips on a couple of these bullets. That's available. That may increase your long range accuracy if you're looking for a gun, you know, like Dan said, where he hunts, 100 yards, 150 yards is about the max you're ever going to shoot. At that distance, the polymer tip probably doesn't make a noticeable difference. If you get any beyond that, it might start to make a difference. But you can even find muzzleloader bullets now that are lead free and completely copper, which are pretty cool. So definitely a long ways from the 55 caliber lead balls that my dad's putting down his gun. Okay, what would be an average time between shooting and loading a modern muzzleloader? So I can do it pretty quick if I have pre-measured powder or the pellets, which is here. It's a good time to talk about this. So actually, this picture on the right, let's just say those are, each one of those pellets is 50 grains, so that's 150 grains in one bullet. You can put all three of those pellets of powder down at one time. They will just slide down the barrel. You don't have to push those generally. The bullet, you are going to have to push down. So you can reload it if you don't clean it as fast as it takes to drop those 3 pellets down and then to push that tight fitting saboted bullet down, all the way down the barrel. So, if I had to guess, I could do that in probably 30 seconds if I really wanted to, if I wanted to get a follow-up shot. Yeah, obviously that's going to depend on how your access is to it and all those different things. So in general, figure that you've got 1 shot, so you better make it count. But if you practice it, I'm sure a couple minutes would be pretty easy to do. No problem at all. Now, okay, powder. So we've already talked about it a little bit. A lot of different types of powder. First off, in this picture in the top left, black powder is different than what most of these guns shoot. And some people will still call, just in general, all muzzleloaders black powder guns. That's fine, that's, everybody knows what you're talking about, but most of them no longer use black powder that you see there. That's pretty hard to find sometimes. That stuff, you could put it out on an anvil and hit a hammer with it, and it'll blow the hammer through a concrete wall. So this stuff is super dangerous. The smokeless powder, the 777 there, and Pyrodex, and a number of different powders, it's a little less volatile like that, but it still gets the job done in your muzzleloader. So the pellets, they're real convenient, but the only issue with them is they are less customizable. So I do the first muzzleloader I ever hunted with, for some reason, it shot a lot better with 90 grains of powder rather than 100. So I wouldn't be able to do that with pellets. So instead, I would get some of these tools down here in the bottom center, that one that's brass that has the screw in part with different lines. That's a powder measure. So each one of those lines is going to represent a different measurement of powder, and they're different. I'm trying to remember mine. I think if it's screwed all the way out, it's like 120 grains. And then every line is 10 or 20 grains. I'd have to look at it. But they'll all have directions that come with them. And then that little thing next to it is just a little canister that you can put your pre-measured powder in and store it, so you don't have to measure that in the field. So it's already measured. To the left of that is going to be a bullet starter. Some of them will be round. That's just a T-handled one, but just gives you a little bit extra leverage because getting these bullets started can be a little bit tricky, and you do not want to scrape that jag, that your ramrod. You do not want to scrape that on your barrel. The inside of your barrel is your accuracy. So, be careful when you're pushing those bullets in. Try not to be scraping the barrel. And then the last little tool down there is just primers, whether they're 209 primers or number 11. Real small, real hard to work with. So that little tool helps you actually put the primer on the nipple where it goes. And in this next slide, I think we got the primers. Most of your modern guns are going to use the 209 shot shell primers, other than the Electra that uses the 9-volt battery. And then there are a couple higher end models that use rifle primers as well. But most of them are going to be 209. Always read the manual that comes with your gun, because it'll tell you what to use and what not to use. Most of them will have a maximum load on stuff like powder that you don't want to go over. So definitely look at that and only use what's supposed to be used with your gun. Keep it safe. Number 11 percussion cap still available. So you may find a gun that uses those two. Same kind of thing, a little bit smaller. And remember, these, if you don't load your gun, essentially these are the same as snap caps. So these are an acceptable way to clean your nipple. Still, you want to follow all your basic firearm safety rules, but a lot of people will go ahead and snap one or two of these off before loading their gun each time, just to make sure all the things that need to be clear are cleared out. Yes, cleaning is the biggest thing that you're going to notice about your muzzleloader. And if you find that you do not like cleaning your muzzleloader, then you're probably not going to shoot your muzzleloader, because you do have to clean it each time. So now this picture on the right is this is an old school gun, and this is just to show you how people used to do it, and you can still do this. So if you do have a gun, you take it off the stock, because obviously you don't want to get your stock wet. But if all you do is you have the barrel, you can use warm water, even warm soapy water, to help cut through barrel grease. And as long as that water is hot enough to get the barrel warm, all the water will evaporate off that barrel before it has a chance to rust. So this is a good way. My dad used to clean his like this in the bathtub. Hot soapy water, take the barrel off, and you can clean it real good. Now, for less labor-intensive ways, our modern-day muzzleloaders have it to where you don't have to completely disassemble the firearm. A lot of them you can just break open or drop the action down and have easy access to that breech plug. Some of these you can take off even with just your fingers. Some are going to give you a special tool to basically unscrew that breech plug, and then you're going to be able to clean that gun with a ramrod or even a bore snake, much in the same way that you clean your other guns. It's just going to take a little bit longer because the everything's a little bit more corrosive in the muzzleloader. So you can take that whole breech plug and just throw it in a some solvent. Make sure it all is cleaned up, and hit it with a little brush or an old toothbrush or your roommate's toothbrush. They don't have to know, whatever. Just don't use your own, because I'm pretty sure that solvent is not supposed to be eaten. And then you can alternate solvent patches and dry patches until clean. And this will take a little while. If I had to guess, I don't know, usually it's more than I want to count, but you're probably going to be putting 10 or 12 patches down it at least. And then at the end, you can put a little lubricant, and that could be the Hoppe's number 9 or Remington oil or any kind of lubricant down there, and then wipe down the whole thing to prevent rust. So once you get the barrel and the nipple all clean, it's pretty much the same type of care that you'd use for any of your guns, but obviously much higher frequency of cleaning, and something that you're either going to want to learn how to enjoy, or you're probably going to want to shoot a different type of firearm, because it will need to be done all the time. I already mentioned these tips, but it's worth mentioning again. Please make the marks on your ramrod, loaded and unloaded. This is going to be a good safety measure for you. And this is awesome when maybe you haven't touched your muzzleloader since last year. You grab it and you definitely want to know, is it loaded or is it unloaded? Because another thing that's dangerous is if you accidentally load another load on top of a load, that's not good either. So those marks are going to be a big lifesaver. If all else fails, it's time to take the gun apart, take the breech plug out, and check and make sure it's loaded. Definitely don't chance it. And if they do give you a special tool to remove the breech plug, don't lose that, because those oftentimes are special tools, and they're almost impossible to find if you lose them. And then if they stop making your muzzleloader, they can become impossible to find. So you'd have to get a special, that special made somewhere. So not good. Try to keep it with your gun. And with that, talk about some of the muzzle loaders that you'd be able to find if you're looking for them. Again, just like Dan said, not an endorsement. We're not paid by any of these people, nor do they give us free guns or anything like that. But if you are looking to buy, you're going to want somewhere to start. So we found a few here. And we're going to start off with economy options. And there is nothing wrong with these guns at all. Actually, in terms of accuracy, you can find economy guns that are going to shoot out to 150 yards just as good as some of the much more expensive guns. And actually, the first muzzleloader I had was a super cheap CVA. I think I got it on sale at Walmart for 99 bucks. And yeah, it was a pain in the booty to clean, let me tell you what, but it actually shot super sweet. And that's the one that I shot 90 grains of powder. And I mean, I had 1-inch accuracy at 125 yards. So super happy with the way that gun shot. Not super happy with how long it took to clean, but that's another story. But this gun right here, the Traditions Buck Stalker, this is available in a number of retailers right in Illinois. I looked at a couple before this webinar. You can find them down to 200 bucks, so a real economy option, a well-made. And Traditions is it's a big name company in the world of muzzleloading, so nothing wrong there. It's a break action design, so this is much easier to clean than that old CVA that I had. You can actually, break it open like a break open shotgun and much easier to get in there. Very basic, and again, don't look past those 45 calibers. Really great caliber for deer. A little less recoil and a little flatter shooting generally. Go up a step into the mid tier, and there's a bunch of muzzleloaders in this category. You really can't go wrong with any of the big names. Thompson Center and CVA are certainly other big names in the world of muzzleloading. And here we got a couple options right in that $300 to $400 range. The Thompson Center Impact, another break open. This one actually has the breech plug that's removable by hand, so bonus points for not needing that separate tool. The Cva Optima, it's been in production now for a long time, so this has been a great hunting gun for a while. Another break open, it's got a quick release breech plug, very similar to the Thompson Center, just a little different designs, really good guns. Moving up from there, getting up into the higher tier guns, CVA Paramount is consistently ranked one of the top high-end muzzleloaders in terms of accuracy, in terms of long range. Really an excellent gun. This is one that you can certainly extend beyond 200 yards if you practice and you're comfortable with your abilities out there. But you're talking about a much steeper price tag. Okay, we're up over $1,000, and set up like this one in the picture, we're probably talking $3,000 to $4,000. So top of the line materials, some of them have bolt actions, which is a better way to ensure that there's a real solid base behind the expulsion. And a lot of them have really long barrels to make sure that all that powder can burn before it gets out of the barrel, letting them use a little bit higher or a hotter charge and get a higher muzzle rate and shoot a little bit better. So anyway, sky's the limit. And even beyond this, I looked up another one it's the Gunworks Generation 2 that it advertises, shooting 1 MOA at 500 yards. So that's 1-inch accuracy at 500 yards, which is insane. And they sell for $5,000 to $10,000. So I did mention that one earlier, but wanted to mention it again. You can go up, obviously, but most of us are super happy with the muzzleloaders down in that 200 to 350 range. No issue at all.
So now we're going to be moving on to handguns for deer hunting. Here we have a few revolvers, pretty cool looking, with scopes on them. The one on the left here has a red dot. We will talk about some optics here in a few slides, but just in case, if you didn't know, you are able to mount some sort of optics or scopes even on revolvers. So with that, we can move on. So in Illinois, you must hunt with a revolver or a single shot pistol if you want to hunt with a handgun. The most popular hunting handguns are probably revolvers. You generally don't see many people using handguns for hunting, but obviously it is an option. It is kind of cool that you are able to do that. And with handguns, they're for hunting, they're generally heavier, so you're able to be more accurate versus other types of handguns for just target shooting or home protection or something like that. And you have to use specific legal calibers of ammunition. You can't just go out there with any sort of handgun or any sort of revolver and go hunting for big game. So we will get into that here next. And in those pictures, sorry, I forgot to mention, if you don't mind going back. In the first picture, we had revolvers. These two, and on this slide, are break action single shot handguns. So that's generally what they look like there. So seasons for handgun hunting, you're going to be able to use handguns during the regular firearm season. So of course, for the regular shotgun muzzleloader handgun season, that's the last weekend in November, first weekend in December. And then if your county does have a late winter antlerless only season, you will again be able to use handgun during those seasons as well. So some handgun regulations. So center fire revolvers are single shot handguns of 30 caliber or larger with a minimum barrel length of 4 inches. So those are your parameters there for what kind of handgun you can use. And for handguns, a bottleneck centerfire cartridge of 30 caliber or larger with a case length of not exceeding 1.4 inches, or a straight walled centerfire cartridge of 30 caliber or larger, both of which must be available at a factory load with the published ballistics table of the manufacturer showing a capability of at least 500 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. There is no case length limit for straight walled cartridges. So brief regulations there. Of course, if you want to dive into all handgun regulations, you can look in the Hunter Digest and of course contact DNR. They do have a whole list of regulations there.
And this is where I'm going to go ahead and go back to a question we received a little bit earlier. We've received it several times over the past years, and a lot of it stems from these kind of AR, so the Armalite rifle styled AR pistols. So I want to clarify up front, this is not legal advice. Obviously, these things change commonly. So even if you were to call a conservation police officer, they're going to often speak in generalities as well, because a lot of this can again change, whether it's the state legislature changing things, the federal government changing things, or even the ATF changing how they classify things. So again, this isn't legal advice, but I'll try to attempt to kind of clean up the noise a little bit here. So technically, AR style pistols can be used as handguns during the Illinois deer firearm season, assuming that they are modified to meet the restrictions that are basically spelled out right here and spelled out in the digest. So one of the common questions that people ask is obviously, again, the AR-15 pistols, particularly like a 300 Blackout or something, would be over that 30 caliber or larger, and it would meet that case length requirement. So what you would have to do is, again, modify that firearm so it's technically an AR pistol. So it cannot have a rear stock or a brace or a vertical grip is attached. And you could technically legally use that during the firearm deer season. Now, the big thing you have to remember is, again, like Adam mentioned, you can only use single shot or revolver styled handguns. And so as we all know, AR style pistols are not single shot, so you will need to modify it so that it is a single shot. You can do this several different ways, and that's something I'll let you guys research on your own if that's something you're interested in. But very commonly, again, people do it. It is legal, assuming, again, you meet these restrictions that are laid out here. So don't just think, you can take your stock off your AR pistol and go use it. There's a lot of other nuances to the regulations and to the law that you need to make sure you're following. But again, in general, Armalite AR style pistols can be modified to be used during the firearm seasons.
Thank you for that clarification, Dan. So moving on to ammunition for popular handgun hunting cartridges. So commonly you'll see ammo such as 357 Magnum, 44 Magnum, and 45 Long Colt usually. You want to shoot hunting ammunition that is made with more powder and better ballistics than just target practice bullets. And again, you want to make sure that the ballistics chart for the ammunition is on the box of ammunition as it is required. It has to have at least 500 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. So again, I stress that, make sure you're shooting, proper hunting ammunition, not just, target plinking rounds. All ammo companies make, better ballistic, more powerful bullets for hunting. So just make sure you look those up and do some research there. So some examples of handguns for hunting. Again, this is not an endorsement. This is just some that we've pulled off the old interwebs and put on here for you guys to see. So kind of your lower end revolver would be a Taurus model 689. Again, this is a revolver, and your price, you're going to see those generally floating around $250 to $350. Moving on to the ones in the middle here, we have the Ruger Blackhawk, which is a pretty popular revolver. A little bit more pricey. You're going to be looking somewhere around $550 to $650. And if you guys look at the one in the middle, the stainless steel with the black grips, you can even see that has mounting points for scope rings on there already. So again, something else to consider there. And then a pretty popular single shot break action hunting pistol here would be the Thompson Center. Again, single shot, and you're looking at those for around $500 to $600. And then here we have sighting in a firearm, and I believe Dan is going to take back over.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, so now we're just going to quickly go over how to sight in a firearm. And I will go ahead and just be honest and upfront. This is one of the more challenging aspects of living in Illinois is access to shooting ranges. So in general, to sight in your firearm, you are going to have to go to a shooting range or find some private land outside of the city and outside of city limits that you're legally allowed to discharge a firearm. So there are some really good references. If you just Google shooting ranges near wherever you live, you will probably find some options that will hopefully allow you to sight in your firearm. Now, if you run into troubles after you've spent some time looking, feel free to reach out to us at any time, and we'll help you kind of point you in the right direction. But there's a few different ways to sight in a firearm. We're going to quickly go over each, but the more common is going to be bore sighting, and this will make sense a little bit later. And then you're going to sight in the scope using the two-shot method. Always, again, remember to practice firearm safety and follow all safety guidelines on your firearm, and make sure to, again, match the correct ammunition to the correct firearm. So laser or bore sighting is pretty common in the marketplace, and it's one of those things. If you do a lot of shooting and sighting in, and maybe you're swapping out scopes constantly, maybe you have a bunch of different firearms, then maybe purchasing a laser bore sighting machine like this is worth it to you. But I have found that a lot of gun stores and gun sales shops and gunsmiths, oftentimes if you go purchase a scope from them and have them install it on your firearm for you, very commonly they will go ahead and bore sight it at the shop for you, so that when you leave that store, you know that you can at least hit a paper target at 25 yards. And that's kind of the main goal of bore sighting, is to be able to just accurately hit a piece of paper at 25 yards. So then you can really start to refine that scope and get it lined up dead on, and then start to move that piece of paper back a little bit further until you get to the range that you're going at. But there's a few things to keep in mind when you're sighting in a firearm. Rule number one, and I see a lot of people, I know when I first started hunting, I was extremely guilty of this, but when I was going to sight in my rifle, I'd buy, cheap ammunition. I never really thought anything of it. But it's very important to sight in the rifle, or sight in the shotgun or the muzzleloader or the handgun with the exact ammunition that you plan on hunting with. That will get you the most accuracy and the most bang for your buck out of your sighting in practice. Now, there's a few different ways you can bore sight. One of the more common is with this laser method. You can either buy ones that go in the barrel or the muzzle of your shotgun. They also sell some that kind of resemble the individual cartridge, and you actually put it in the action of your firearm, and it'll turn on that way. So there's different options, but essentially you're just going to put the laser inside of your firearm, point it at a target, and then align your scope to match that dot. And again, the ultimate goal here is to just get it paper targeting, so you can hit paper at 20 or 25 yards, so that you don't waste a ton of ammunition trying to figure out where you're hitting. Now, if you don't want to go through the process of using a laser bore sight, you can do this kind of DIY depending on the firearm you have. If it allows you to pull the barrel off with the scope still attached to the barrel, you can kind of pseudo do this yourself just by kind of setting it up on a nice steady rest, looking through the exact center of that barrel and the muzzle, and find out where a bullet would potentially be hitting, and then kind of move your crosshairs down from there. Again, you're not trying to get it accurate at this stage. You're just trying to get it to hit paper at 25 yards so that you can start to refine your scope a little bit later. Now, when you're sighting in, I always, even after I bore sighted, I always start at 25 yards. If you start at 100 yards with a brand new scope and a brand new setup, it's going to be very hard to figure out where you're hitting, and you're going to have to make guesses. And it oftentimes it'll lead you having to start over from scratch at the beginning. So again, get it paper sighted to about 25 yards, and then aim at the center of the target and take 3 shots. This is another common mistake I see a lot of people made, and I was certainly guilty of it and still am to some extent. But a lot of people will take 1 shot, see where that hits, and they will immediately adjust their scope after that 1 shot. Now, if you're a very competent shooter and you understand how you shoot a firearm, and maybe you understand the nuances of how you move and how you have a good trigger pull, then you may be able to do that. But what I recommend is sending 3 shots downrange and seeing where they go. Because always there's going to be 1 or 2 that just, maybe you flinched, maybe you pulled it slightly left or slightly right. Because again, we're working in millimeters here. Millimeter off it, the sight of the firearm is going to equal inches downrange. And so always take 3 shots and see where they go. Once you get that zeroed in, I'll typically take 4 or 5 more shots to really decide, okay, I'm getting a very solid grouping here. And then I will start to move that target back and repeat until I get to the accurate distance that I want. Now, typically with me, I know a lot of people like to sight their shotgun in at 100 yards or so. Now, what I mentioned earlier in the places I hunt, I don't hunt big open, fields. I'm hunting in the timber, typically in very kind of hilly and terrainy country. So I don't need to personally be able to shoot a shotgun at 100 yards. And so I sight my shotgun in for 40 to 50 yards, and that has worked well for me over the years. But again, that's something you can decide as you kind of hone in your skills and figure out where you're going to hunt. But I would recommend, when you go to sight in, buy as much ammo as you think you're going to need, and then buy another box or 2, because inevitably, if you run out of ammo during the sighting in process, it can be pretty frustrating and pretty annoying. So just make sure you have enough ammo to be able to get the job done. And again, we're not going, what I like to say is if you're shooting and you're what we call grouping, so you can see here in this illustration, we kind of have 3 shots that are kind of scattered all over the place. What that tells me is that the shooter is not doing their best job at maintaining that firearm position, particularly if they shot all these 3 shots without adjusting that scope. And so if you see a grouping like this, that probably tells you as the shooter that something is probably wrong with your form, with your trigger pull, or something that caused you to throw those few shots. Especially at 25 yards, you should have a very tight group, and you almost want all of the holes to kind of be touching each other. And when your holes are touching each other, that lets you know that your form is really solid, really steady, and you're shooting accurately. And then you can move the scope to match and kind of move that group where it needs to be. Now, this method is a great kind of quick and dirty method. This is called the kind of two-shot method. Essentially, you're going to place a target at 25 yards and take a shot with your crosshairs at the center of the target. Now you're going to, and again, this is not my preferred method because, again, I like to send a few shots downrange just to minimize myself making errors. But you can see what this individual here is using. It's called a lead sled. And they've really picked up steam in the past, I don't know, 10, 15 years or so, and they've become very common. But they take all of the guesswork out of shooting, and particularly for sighting in. So you can see the gun has a nice steady rest at the forearm. But what you can kind of see it also in his shoulder pocket. There's also another portion that's holding up the rear of that shotgun, and it's got very adjustable kind of dials, I guess, that you can rotate and kind of raise and lower different portions of the firearm to get it rock steady. And you can see he's got a pretty solid weight holding all of it down. But what that does is that takes all the guesswork out of you as the shooter, because you know that shotgun is pointing exactly where it should be, and then you can see if your scope is off from there. So with this method, I would recommend using some type of lead sled if you want to do this two-shot method. But again, you're going to take one shot at 25 yards and adjust your crosshairs so they are basically aiming at the center of the hole that you just shot. Again, it's very important that the actual gun itself does not move here, but that only your adjustment of the scope is going to move. And you can see at the top of the scope, if you're not familiar with scope, there's essentially two dials. You'll have to remove a couple caps to allow you to be able to adjust the scope, but there's basically a left and right dial and an up and down dial. And so those at this stage, after your first shot with this two-shot method, that's all you should be adjusting are these horizontal and vertical dials on the top of the scope, and try to get that scope dead center over the hole. And now you move your target out to 100 yards and shoot in the center again, and your bullet should be about as close to being in the middle of that target as possible. And now you can start to take a few more shots to confirm your group. Now, we've kind of discussed scopes throughout this presentation because we had quite a bit of questions on scopes. It's important to note that, again, a scope is not required for deer hunting. It does certainly help and make it a little bit more advantageous to reach out to further distances and increase that effective range. But again, it's not a requirement. Now, you can pretty much put a scope on any firearm that's out there. Some of them you may, have to go to a gunsmith and get holes tapped into it to accept the mounting system. But most firearms these days do have some mounting capabilities for scopes. Now, it also is important to understand the numbers on a scope and what those individual numbers mean. And so when you see a scope, you're going to see typically three numbers. So you're going to see a 3x9x40. That's a fairly common scope setting, or scope magnification, so to speak. Now, the 3x9 is going to be the magnification. So in this scenario, this 3x9x40 is a zoomable scope. So you can have it fully wide at 3 magnification, or you can zoom it in all the way to 9. Now, if you're brand new to the world of hunting with a scope, I will say, I personally, when I'm hunting, I always have it at its widest setting. So in this case, that would be a 3. So it's very wide, it's not zoomed in. And I'll share a quick story about why I chose that. When I think it would have been 2005. So I was 15 years old hunting with my dad, and we had an 8-point buck walk underneath the stand to about 10 or 15 yards. And again, this is in Missouri, where I was hunting with a rifle. And I stupidly, I was a 15-year-old kid. I didn't really know much better. I had my scope zoomed in all the way to 9. Well, I pulled that scope up and tried to find the deer in my crosshairs. And you can imagine trying to find something at magnification 9 that's 10 yards away. You're not going to be able to find it. So I always like to start out with that wider setting. And if a target's further away, usually you're going to have time to adjust the scope. And if not, then that's probably not a shot you should take anyway. So I prefer to start on the wider setting. And if I need to during a hunt, I will adjust that. Now, the 40 number here is going to be the outer lens of the scope. And so that's going to be what determines the available light that it uses. And in a lot of cases, the zoom is not necessarily what makes a scope more expensive. A lot of it is how much light it can absorb. And so if you've ever used a very high-end pair of binoculars, kind of at dusk or at dawn, you'll notice that it almost looks brighter looking through the binoculars than you can humanly see with your naked eye. And so that's where you're going to spend money on scopes. A lot of cases is going to be this outer rim number. And in this case, it's a 40. So that's going to get a lot of, this is a very common setting. But if you want something that absorbs a little bit more light to allow you to see into those twilight minutes a little bit, that can be advantageous. But remember, again, with deer hunting, legal season or legal shooting light starts 30 minutes before sunrise and 30 minutes after sunset. So there's not a ton of time where you might need that big front element to absorb a ton of light, but it can certainly be advantageous over time. Now there are tons and tons and tons of different scopes on the market. What you really want to pay attention to is obviously read reviews. I think a lot of people don't take the time to review a lot of options, especially with optics, but I think that's very important because these are very nuanced devices. And, you know, why would you spend all this money to draw a tag and travel to hunt and buy all this equipment and then put, you know, a $50 scope on a $500 shotgun? You're basically creating a bottleneck there. So do your research, find one that's got good reviews, but also match your firearm to the shotgun. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but you want to make sure that the scope that you purchase is rated for the caliber or gauge that you're using. Shotgun in this case would be gauge. So if you were to put a very inexpensive, you know, let's say 22 scope, or even some of the smaller rifles like a 223 or 243 scope on a 12 gauge shotgun and shoot a slug through it, it's going to destroy that scope and it's not going to hold zero and it's not going to maintain its accuracy. So you want to make sure to get one that's rated for the firearm that you're using, and so that it can absorb that recoil and that concussion from the shot going off without damaging the elements of that scope. Now, some common scope manufacturers, again, these are not endorsements, but Vortex, Leopold are kind of at the higher end of things. Bushnell, Burris, Redfield, Simmons, and Nikon. You can find a ton of really good options out there. I personally have used a Bushnell scope for years. I have a Vortex on one of my rifles from Missouri, and they all work really well. Just again, read reviews, try to find one that has a good customer service policy, and you should do very well for yourself. Now, a few other kind of gear that you might need while you're out there. We'll just quickly go through this list. I know we're running a little bit over time here, so we'll go through this stuff fairly quickly. But slings, we've mentioned some of these firearms are heavy and bulky, and oftentimes when you're deer hunting, particularly on public land, you may be walking, you know, a quarter mile to a half mile to a mile in some cases to get to your hunting spot. And so having a sling on your firearm is really advantageous to get your hands free, to take that weight off of your hands, to make sure that when you're up in your stand and you need to take a shot, that your arms are still functioning properly, not from carrying around a 10-pound firearm for, you know, 45 minutes to an hour with another tree stand on your back and all this stuff. So slings are a definite necessity for a lot of hunters. Now, I will say, if you're brand new and you just want to go buy, you hear this, you're like, oh, I need to go buy a sling. Do a little bit of research, because not every sling is going to fit every firearm. Every firearm has different mounting attachments and different mounting techniques and different hardware. That's something that you can look in your firearm owner's manual, and it'll tell you how to properly attach a sling, and it'll tell you what mounts it has or what mounts it can accept. And so then you can get a sling installed pretty quickly. Now, if you don't want to go through the route of buying one of these that are kind of, you know, a little high end, a little nice, and are kind of made to fit with your attachments, they do sell some that just kind of slip over the barrel and kind of create kind of a slip knot type system on the receiver and then on the front end. Those are also an option. Now, if you're walking long periods of time, I would certainly invest in a decent scope or a decent sling that's going to be comfortable and reliable. Now, cases are critical to firearm storage, especially for hunters. Now, transporting firearms in Illinois, there are a few, again, restrictions that you need to follow and abide by. A firearm needs to be completely unloaded and completely encased or completely cased before you travel. So I'll put it in a hard case, especially a firearm with a scope. I prefer a hard case over a soft case, because a soft case can allow that scope to just be kind of bumped or nudged, and that will over time start to take the zero out of that scope, and it may lose its accuracy and you may have to sight it in a little bit. So I prefer to put it in a nice hard case. That way it's protected, it's safe, and you're good to go. Soft cases still can be effective. They're really, lightweight, cheap, good stuff. But again, I personally prefer a hard case. Just again, it gives you a little more peace of mind for that optic that you put on your firearm. Now, rangefinders, this is something that is not a necessity. This is kind of one of those optional accessories. I will say the next accessory that we talk about, I will say, is 100% a requirement for any firearm hunter, but a rangefinder, not so much. So rangefinders are really good at, again, finding range. So if you're not, used to judging distances out in an open field, for instance, that can be very challenging. And so having a rangefinder in your pocket can just quickly allow you to pull up, say, okay, that tree is 80 yards. So now I know anything within, between me and that big tree out in the field is within 80 yards, is within my effective range, or whatever you sighted your firearm. So they can be effective. Now, you don't have to get the most expensive rangefinder on the market. There are several different types. So there are what a lot of people call golf rangefinders, and you can buy those just on Amazon for $20 or $30. Now, those do actually shoot a physical laser out into the out to wherever you're pointing it at. I prefer the ones that are kind of designed for hunters, because they don't shoot a visible laser, and they have a little bit more gadgets that you can kind of use, particularly if you're interested in bow hunting. A lot of them can kind of calculate the angle for you and give you the distance of that angled shot versus the straight horizontal shot in case you're up in a tree stand. Again, not something that's required for firearm hunters, but is nice to have. Now, in addition to blaze orange, obviously, if we're firearm hunting, we're required to wear a blaze orange or pink vest and a blaze orange or pink cap. I would say this is the next most important piece of gear in a firearm hunter's arsenal, so to speak. And you may think, why? I have a scope on my firearm, and that's exactly why. We don't want to utilize that scope to look at things and try to get a better picture of something. Maybe we see some movement out in the distance or through some brush, and we want to get a better eye and a better look at it. Don't use your scope for that, because then you're immediately breaking several of the tenets of firearm safety. You're pointing at things you don't know what they are. So never use that scope as kind of a set of binoculars. And so it's really nice to have a separate pair of binoculars, so you don't have to point your firearm at everything you see just to try to get a better look at it. Now, binoculars, you can spend a lot of money, or you can spend a little money. I prefer kind of the medium range. Spending $100 to $200 is gonna, not even one, maybe let's say $70 to $200. You're gonna get a heck of a pair of binoculars. Anything over that, you're looking at a pair of binoculars that I probably wouldn't take hunting anyway. But there's a lot in the market, and we're going to clear up a few things to keep in mind with binoculars, similar to what we discussed with scopes when we talked about the 3x9x40. These are kind of nomenclated the same way. So this is a 10x42 pair as an example. Now you can see by just the one number at the beginning, instead of 3x9x40, this is 10x42. So these binoculars do not zoom, but they do have a level 10 magnification. Now, I will personally say 10 magnification is a little high for me personally. I prefer an 8x42 binoculars, and that simply, I have a little bit shaky hands, and I really struggle to focus with 10. That's just a little bit too much magnification, and it really amplifies any handshake that you may have. So personally, I prefer an 8. It allows me a little bit wider of a field of view, but it's also not so shaky. Now, again, that 42, that second number, refers to similar to the scope. It refers to that outer optic or that outer lens. So the larger that number is, the more light that it's going to absorb. Now, this is where I would spend a little bit more money on the front optic than I would a scope, because having a pair of binoculars that allows you to see during twilight hours is awesome, especially as a deer hunter. I don't know how many times I've been sitting in the woods and, waiting for legal light to get here. You're just sitting and you just hear something, maybe walk, 20 yards away as you're in the tree and you're trying to squint and see what it is. Well, in a lot of cases with a very nice pair of binoculars that have a nice front big element that absorbs a lot of light, a lot of times you'll be able to pull out those binoculars and at least get an idea of what is kind of walking through. So that's a great option. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason and he's going to take us home. But thanks for joining us tonight, everybody.
Thanks a lot, guys. So we have one more upcoming webinar scheduled for May 6th, and we're going to be partnering with Pheasants Forever. We're going to be talking about land management that you can do to increase game animal and wildlife activity on your land or other land around you. So if you're interested in seeing how the game and wildlife interact with the landscape, join us for that and get some tips and pointers on how you can improve your landscape.
Yeah, and if you're ever curious about, some of the different habitat management practices you see on DNR ground and how you can kind of use that information as a hunter to kind of guide your hunting strategy or your hunt planning process, we're really going to dive into that stuff here. So that I'm excited for this webinar. I think it's something you guys will really enjoy.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, if you ever see a prescribed burn and wonder what's going on over there, you're going to get the answer to that night. And then follow us on socials. I've added on here, if you've been with us on previous webinars, we haven't been pushing this enough. So I put it on here. So the Illinois Learn to Hunt Connection. And you can join that if you've ever been with us through our workshop or webinar. And you can request to become a member of that Facebook page. And you can use that to communicate with past participants and ask them questions or get tips or maybe even go hunting with each other or something like that. So just wanted to make people aware that we have that as an option through our Facebook page. Check that out. And then also follow us on Instagram and on YouTube. You can find some past webinars on our YouTube page now and some other interviews and things with state biologists and some U of I biologists as well. So check out the YouTube page. Very interesting stuff on there. We're going to come up with some more things with that as the program continues. So keep an eye out and follow along.
And also another video I want to highlight real quick, Jason, that I just thought about. I did a pretty deep dive. It's about a 10 or 15 minute video looking at the differences between a rifled slug versus Sabot slug. So if you're really interested in getting that first shotgun and you're not sure whether you want to go with a rifled barrel or a smooth barrel, if you go to our YouTube channel, you can find that video and we do kind of a nice deep dive into that. So if you want to learn a little bit more information than we covered tonight, specifically on rifled slug versus Sabot slugs, you can find that video there.
Good point. Awesome. So if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to ask us now. And like I said, if you think of anything when we're not in a webinar, please reach out through our Facebook or our webpage, and we'll be happy to help you out. All right. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for coming and joining along tonight. We appreciate it. And yeah, so have a wonderful evening. I don't think any questions are coming through right now, so that's fine. And we'll see you next time and see you in the woods hopefully someday. And have a great evening.
And if you haven't submitted your first deer lottery application, do it today or tomorrow.